The prison yard was silent for 1 second. Then everything exploded at once. Men were shouting. Sirens were screaming. Smoke rose into the cold morning air. Guards were trapped. Inmates were running. Helicopters circled above, their blades chopping the sky. From the outside, it looked like a war zone. From inside, it felt like the end of the world. This was not just a prison riot. This was the moment that would change U.S. prison laws forever. At Attica Correctional Facility in New York, one of the most famous prisons in America, control was gone. Inmates had taken over most of the prison. They held hostages. They made demands. And for the first time, the whole country was forced to look inside prison walls and ask a hard question. What happens when people push too far finally push back? But to understand how this moment happened, we must go back to the beginning. Before the shouting, before the smoke, before the world was watching, Attica was built to be tough. Tall concrete walls, steel bars, guard towers watching every move. Inside, life was hard and strict. Most inmates were locked in small cells for long hours. Food was poor. Medical care was slow. Many men felt ignored and forgotten. The prison was overcrowded. Cells built for one person often held two. Showers were limited. Toilets barely worked. Letters were delayed. Complaints went unanswered. Tension grew every day. Most of the inmates were young men. Many were far from home. Many felt they were treated unfairly. They talked quietly at first, then louder, then openly. They asked for small things: better food, more showers, fair treatment, basic respect. Nothing changed. Guards were under pressure too. They worked long shifts. They were short-staffed. Fear lived on both sides of the bars. All it needed was one spark. That spark came on September 9th, 1971. It started with a small fight. Then a door opened when it should not have. A group of inmates rushed forward. Guards panicked. Keys were dropped. More doors opened. Suddenly, hundreds of inmates were free inside the prison. They ran to the yard. In just minutes, Attica was no longer under state control. The inmates took hostages, guards and workers who were caught in the chaos. They did not harm them at first. They used them as protection. Word spread fast. Outside the prison, police arrived. Then state officials. Then reporters. Cameras pointed at the walls. America was watching live. Inside the yard, inmates organized quickly. They formed groups. They chose leaders. They wrote a list of demands. They wanted fair treatment. They wanted better living conditions. They wanted to be treated as human beings. They shouted their demands through megaphones. Some guards listened. Some officials listened. Negotiations began. For 4 days, the world waited. Inmates stood in the open yard, sleeping on the ground. They shared food. They protected the hostages. Some prayed. Some cried. Some believed real change was finally coming. The inmates believed that if they stayed calm, if they showed control, the state would listen. But fear was growing outside the walls. Officials worried about losing power. Politicians worried about looking weak. Rumors spread that inmates were out of control. Lies mixed with fear. Pressure built. On the morning of September 13th, the decision was made. The state would take Attica back by force. The inmates did not know what was coming. Then the helicopters appeared. Gas filled the air. Gunfire followed. Chaos swallowed the yard. People ran with nowhere to go. Screams echoed off concrete walls. In minutes, the riot was over. When the smoke cleared, Attica was silent again. But the cost was terrible. Dozens of people were dead, both inmates and hostages. The nation was shocked. Photos spread. Stories poured out. Survivors spoke. Families demanded answers. Investigations began. Courts stepped in. And slowly, something changed. America could no longer pretend it did not know what happened behind prison walls. Laws were reviewed. Prison rules were challenged. Inmate rights were discussed openly for the first time. Medical care, food standards, and overcrowding became national issues. Attica became a warning, a lesson written in blood, fear, and failure. But the story was not over, because what happened after the riot The cover-ups, the trials, the reforms, and the fight for justice, which shaped the prison system for decades. And as survivors began to speak, a new truth started to come out. One that would force America to face what it had done. That truth would change everything. After the smoke cleared, Attica did not return to normal. It could not. The yard that had been filled with shouting and hope was now quiet and broken. Shoes lay where people had fallen. Blankets were torn. Blood stained the concrete. Guards and inmates were counted again and again because no one was sure who was alive and who was not. Inside the prison, fear replaced chaos. Inmates were forced back into their cells. Many were stripped, beaten, or threatened. Some were made to crawl. Some were lined up for hours. Guards were angry. They were scared. And they wanted control back. Outside the walls, the story being told was different. Officials said the inmates had killed hostages. They said extreme force was necessary. They said there was no other choice. At first, many people believed them. But then facts began to fall apart. Autopsies showed something shocking. The hostages had not died the way officials claimed. They were killed by gunfire from the retaking of the prison, not by inmates. The bullets matched police weapons. That truth hit the country like another explosion. Families of the dead demanded answers. Lawyers stepped in. Reporters dug deeper. Survivors started talking. They described what life was like before the riot, the overcrowding, the hunger, the disrespect. They explained that the riot was not planned violence. It was desperation. The government tried to move on, but the courts would not let it. Investigations dragged on for years. Lawsuits were filed. Testimony was heard. Evidence was uncovered that showed abuse, cover-ups, and false reports. Slowly, very slowly, the prison system began to change. New rules were written. Medical care standards improved. Overcrowding became a legal issue. Inmate rights were taken seriously for the first time. Attica became a symbol, not just of violence, but of failure. Other prisons paid attention. States reviewed their systems. Laws were rewritten to prevent another disaster like it. Training for guards changed. Oversight increased. But for many survivors, justice still felt far away. Some guards were never punished. Many inmates carried trauma for life. Families waited decades for compensation and apologies. Attica did not fix everything, but it cracked the walls of silence. For the first time, America admitted that prisons were not just places of punishment, but places that could explode if ignored. And as new prisons were built and laws were rewritten, one question followed every reform. Had the system really learned its lesson? Because years later, riots would still happen. And when they did, everyone remembered Attica. In the final chapter, we will see how Attica's legacy still shapes U.S. prisons today, and whether the changes it forced were enough to prevent history from repeating itself.